The headless uncle. It's just another regular school day in India. The students are chatting, half awake, probably complaining about homework, and suddenly in walks a 17-year-old boy holding a freshly severed human head like it's a trophy from a gladiator match. And not just any human head, his uncle's head. Yes, you heard that right. This teenage Hannibal Lecter in training literally decapitated his own uncle, casually strolled into school, and dropped the head on his desk like it was a late homework assignment. Turns out the uncle had allegedly been abusing him for years. Apparently he lived with his uncle since he was an orphan, and the man started molesting him as soon as he turned 7. The boy was now 16. So for 9 years, the teenager had been going through the most horrific things, and I guess at some point he just said enough was enough. You see, the night before he came into school holding his uncle's head, the uncle had once again tried to take advantage of the young boy. However, this time around, the boy fought back. He bashed the uncle's head in with his bedside lamp, ran out, and got a kitchen knife. Then he proceeded to stab the uncle over and over again till the man stopped moving. And I guess the head cut was to make sure his tormentor was truly and completely dead. This was an act to ensure the uncle was permanently removed from the family tree. He literally took the words cutting ties to a whole new level. Now, it gets even crazier because while most people who commit such an act would flee the crime scene or at least have the decency to hide the evidence, this kid woke up the next morning, dressed up for school, and picked up the head like some lunchbox. And as we already know, he just strolled into school and class with it. Some psychologists believe he was just in a state of shock, that he walked into school without fully realizing he was holding his uncle's head. But I mean, do we really believe that? Personally, I think he just wanted people to know what he'd done and fear him. I mean, nothing sends a message to your bullies like holding a severed human head. Either way, his classmates got the message loud and clear. Nobody was about to borrow his pencils without asking ever again. Naturally, the school staff called the authorities, and when the police arrived, they took head boy, no pun intended, okay, pun absolutely intended, into custody. The insane cult teacher. It was 2011 in León, Mexico, when a group of 7th grade students were in Colegio Enrique Rebsamen College, probably doodling in their notebooks and daydreaming about lunch. That's when their teacher, Norma Patricia Esquivel, a woman they trusted to educate them, decided to take a sharp left turn into full-blown cult leader mode. Instead of teaching the poor children algebra, she started going on and on about how the world was apparently going to end that day. First, the children were confused. Then they thought she was just joking, but nothing about what Norma was saying was sounding like a joke. She was utterly and completely convinced that the apocalypse was happening that very day and kept ranting on about how she was the only one who could save them from eternal damnation. Imagine telling a bunch of 11-year-olds that on a very bright and sunny school day. LOL. Now it gets worse because while the mad woman was raving about the end of the world and all that, she apparently had a solution that would save the chosen ones, aka her class of 9th graders. And just when the students thought it couldn't get creepier, Norma brings out a bunch of things from her bag and starts to mix them all together. Oh, and yes, she locked the classroom doors and windows so the kids couldn't even leave to ask for help. The concoction she was mixing was termed holy water, and according to Norma, anyone who drank the so-called holy water would be saved. Yeah, nope. By now, the students were full-on panicking because they knew their teacher was obviously out of her mind. But again, they were locked in and had no way to find help. However, things took a turn for the better because before this whole fiasco initially started, a student had left the class to go use the restroom, and on his way back, he noticed that the class doors were locked. So the child walked to the next classroom to get help, and when the new teacher arrived, she realized that something was very wrong. They called Norma many times, but all the calls went straight to voicemail, and when she finally picked up, she told them that she was the only one brave enough to do what needed to be done. Others were like, what the hell does that even mean? The school authorities then immediately called the police, and within minutes they were storming the school like it was an action movie. The teacher, still fully convinced the world was ending, freaked out when the cops arrived, but thankfully she hadn't managed to feed anyone her magic potion yet. After the incident, authorities discovered that the teacher had been involved in a doomsday cult and was completely brainwashed to believe that the apocalypse was happening. Also, when forensic investigators tested her so-called holy water, they found out it was a mix of really corrosive acids and lemon juice. I guess the lemon juice was supposed to tone down the acid or something. Well, thank God none of the kids drank it, because this story would have definitely become a bigger tragedy. As for Norma, she faced multiple legal charges, and the school had to explain to hundreds of terrified parents why their kids were almost sacrificed instead of learning algebra. Fake school shooting. When students go to school, they probably want to learn algebra, English, or literature. However, on the 13th of June 2008, the students of Meadowland Elementary School learned something entirely different. They had a first-hand introduction to trauma. This is because the substitute teacher that was hired decided that his lesson plan for the day was going to be on how to traumatize your students in under 10 minutes. When this substitute teacher came in for their history class, he decided to do one better and give the students an interactive learning experience by faking a school shooting. Yes, you heard that right. Instead of, teaching kids how to diagram sentences or why Pluto got downgraded from a planet, this guy goes, you know what these 11-year-olds need? A little life or death terror. So he literally starts screaming, shouting, and banging on the tables in his class. First of all, the children were very confused, probably thinking he was doing some kind of interpretive history dance, but then he started shouting, "Shooter." Next, he ran into the hallways, hit all the fire alarms, and started banging on different doors, screaming at the top of his lungs. Imagine the panic that followed. Students were confused, scared, and the fear spread like wildfire. Even though they hadn't heard any gunshots, the tension and screaming made the whole thing feel very, very real. They were pushing themselves to get out of classes, some hid under their tables, while the ones with phones started calling their parents, sobbing and crying. This was a very horrible scene. Well, after a while of the senseless panic and fear, some teachers started to realize something. There was no actual sound of gunfire or shootings. In fact, the only thing that pointed to a shooter was the history teacher who kept screaming. Eventually, some teachers managed to pin him down and drag him into the principal's office, where they started to question him on what just happened. Guess what his excuse was? He was only trying to teach them how to survive a real shooting. He also didn't inform the school because he wanted it to be as real as possible. Apparently, psychological damage was part of the school curriculum he received. Thankfully, he was fired immediately, and the authorities were called to arrest him. He was charged for reckless endangerment and causing a public nuisance, and if I'm being honest, he should also be charged with more. You know what else would be reckless? You loving our videos but not subscribing! Fix that now. Thank you! Mwah. The South Korea school fire cover-up. It all happened on June 29, 2003 at Sealand Youth Training Center, a South Korean boarding school/camp. That night, the kids, mostly between 6 and 7 years old, were asleep in their dorms when the fire suddenly broke out. The children, coughing, choking, and dying from smoke inhalation, couldn't get the doors open because someone had locked it from the outside. Yes, you heard that right. They were locked in with the freaking fire, and as a result, 19 children and 4 adults that couldn't escape burned to death. Turns out this wasn't some mysterious supernatural flame conjured up by an angry ghost. The fire started because of faulty wiring and terrible building materials. First, the dormitories were made of flammable materials, the frigging fire alarms didn't work, and just for an extra sprinkle of what the hell is wrong with you, the emergency exits were also locked. So even if the kids had woken up in time to escape, they couldn't get out. Now, it gets even more twisted because after the poor children had been burned to a crisp and the investigation started, the police realized that the only adults that died were the ones locked in the dorms with the kids. In fact, the people who locked them in were their own teachers. Apparently, the teachers thought that the best way to contain the fire was to close the doors and save themselves. Well, after this tragedy, the school still refused responsibility for their actions. They even tried to sweep it under the rug by releasing false statements and bribing officials. The school officials downplayed the incident and lied about the safety regulations in place and tried to pin everything as an unfortunate accident. But the public wasn't buying any of it. Parents of the victims demanded justice, and an investigation quickly revealed that this school had been violating multiple safety laws, including not having proper fire exits. Thankfully, several school officials were arrested, and the owners of the facility were sentenced to prison. But here's the thing, none of that brought back those kids. None of it erased the fact that the adults who should have protected them abandoned them instead. The Japan schoolgirl murder. Most 11-year-olds spend their time playing video games, doodling in their notebooks, or complaining about homework. But Natsumi Tsuji had a slightly different hobby, reading about murders. She was obsessed with horror movies, violent manga, and creepy online forums, and her favorite was a Japanese horror flash animation called The Red Room, which was all about a supernatural force that kills people who visit a cursed website. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Natsumi wasn't just into watching horror, she wanted to be in one. Now, at this time, Natsumi had a friend named Satomi Mitarai, who was also her classmate. The two had been friends for a while, or at least school acquaintances, but things took a turn for the worse when Satomi left some mean comments about Natsumi online. What did she say? Nobody knows for sure, but according to reports, Satomi had called Natsumi fat and insulted her on an internet message board. Now, for most people, an insult like that leads to a dramatic unfriending, a passive-aggressive text, or maybe a well-placed eye roll. But for Natsumi, it meant murder. So on June 1st, 2004, in the middle of an ordinary school day, Natsumi asked Satomi to follow her into an empty classroom. No one thought much of it. I mean, after all, what's the worst that could happen? A heated argument? A few exchanged insults? Maybe some mean girl vibes? Well, it was much worse. Once they were alone, Natsumi pulled out a box cutter and slashed Satomi's throat. She didn't stop there because she kept cutting, slicing deep into Satomi's arms and face, leaving her covered in blood before she collapsed onto the classroom floor. And the wildest part? This 11-year-old psycho just walked away. When she got back to class with her arms and clothes covered in blood, the teachers immediately asked what was wrong, and this girl straight up told them, "I did something bad." Understatement of the century. She was immediately arrested, and when police asked her why she did it, her response was, "Because she made fun of me online." That's it. That was her reason. An 11-year-old murdered her classmate over internet drama. Now, Japan isn't new to crime, but this was next-level chilling. First of all, the killer was 11. Second, she showed zero remorse. And third, she used a freaking box cutter. The media went wild, calling her Girl A to protect her identity because Japanese law forbids identifying minors in crimes. The internet, however, wasn't having it, as they quickly uncovered her real name. But since Natsumi was so young, she couldn't be tried as an adult. Instead, she was sent to a juvenile detention center where she stayed until she was 20 years old. Now, here's the strangest part of the whole thing. Instead of just being remembered as a crime story, Natsumi Tsuji became an internet legend. People online started calling her Nevada-tan because she was wearing a University of Nevada sweatshirt in one of her photos. Some creepy internet users even turned her into a cult icon, making fan art memes and even cosplay based on her. Yeah, people literally started dressing up as an 11-year-old murderer. And if that wasn't weird enough, her story inspired horror manga, books, and even movies. The Student Cannibal. In 2012, in a quiet Brazilian town, a 16-year-old high school student decided that he wanted to switch up his food palette and did something so nightmare-inducing that even his own classmates refused to believe it at first. He killed and ate someone. So our teenage wannabe Hannibal invited his friend over to his house for Netflix and chill, but turns out the friend was on the menu for the day. This boy made his friend comfortable, went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed him over and over again from behind. The poor boy didn't even stand a chance. After he had successfully butchered his friend, he then started cutting off pieces of his flesh like it was steak. Then he went to the kitchen, put the flesh on the fire, and cooked it with salt and pepper, and then he ate it. Ugh. Yeah, it was a gruesome, premeditated, and senseless act of evil. Now, what you're probably wondering is why a 16-year-old boy would even do such a thing. I mean, was he possessed? Was this some kind of satanic ritual? Nope, because according to him, he was just being curious. That's right, he literally told the police, "I just wanted to see what it tasted like." Excuse me? My guy, there are entire food channels dedicated to trying weird flavors. You didn't have to go straight to human flesh. Maybe try spicy chips. To make matters worse, before the police caught on to him, he went around telling every Tom, Dick, and Harry who cares to listen that he had eaten human meat. Like, imagine being in class, stressing about your next test, and then the kid sitting next to you suddenly goes, "Hey, guess what human meat tastes like?" Oh, and according to him, it was the best thing he's ever eaten. Ugh. Naturally, his classmates were horrified, and that was when one of them went straight to the authorities to repeat what he heard. When the police raided his house, they found evidence of his crime in his bedroom. His diary was filled with drawings of people practicing cannibalism, and his search history on Google was basically a step-by-step guide on how to cook and eat human flesh. He even wrote down the parts he'd love to try next, like the buttocks and tongue. Well, the teen was immediately arrested, and the story spread like wildfire. The media dubbed him the Brazilian cannibal student, and people all over the country were shocked, disgusted, and straight up traumatized. He was sentenced to juvenile detention because in Brazil, minors can't receive life sentences even after you brutally murder and eat your friend. But let's be real, how do you even recover from finding out your classmate is a literal cannibal? Low budget Michael Myers. High school is usually full of bad cafeteria food, pop quizzes, and awkward promposals, but on April 9th, 2014, Franklin Regional High School in Murraysville, Pennsylvania turned into something straight out of a slasher film. And no, not the kind where the dumb blonde trips while running upstairs. This was real, and it was brutal. Now, you know how every school has that one quiet kid who sits at the back of the class, never talks, and probably has a weird obsession with medieval weapons? Yeah, that was Alex Haribal. At 16 years old, Haribal wasn't exactly known for being violent. He wasn't failing school, wasn't being bullied as far as anyone knew, and wasn't running around screaming about conspiracy theories. In fact, he was just a normal, awkward teen. But one day, he woke up and decided to go full Michael Myers, except instead of wearing a creepy mask and stalking people at night, he grabbed 2 kitchen knives and walked into school like he was about to carve up a Thanksgiving turkey. Considering what he did, carving up a turkey was definitely his plan. This guy bursts into the school at exactly 7:13 a.m. right before classes started and immediately started stabbing everyone in sight. He'd walk up to you and just stab or slash you. He ran down the hallways, slashing at random students like some kind of speedrun mode horror villain. He didn't even say a word the whole time, but went from classroom to classroom, hallway to hallway, attacking anyone in his path. Within 5 minutes, he had stabbed or slashed 21 people. That's almost a person every 15 seconds. Some students got stabbed in the chest, some in the back, some in the arms, and a few even barely dodged his blades. One kid got stabbed so hard the knife pierced his liver, and yet somehow, miraculously, nobody died. That's right, despite 21 stab wounds and a bloodbath that looked like a Game of Thrones episode, every single victim magically survived. Now, while most people were running for their lives, Sam King, the assistant principal who had absolutely no time for this nonsense, charged straight at Haribal, tackled him like a football linebacker, and held him down until the school cop showed up. Once police had him handcuffed, Haribal finally spoke, and let's just say his explanation didn't make things any better. First, he told officers he was inspired by Columbine and wanted to be remembered forever, then claimed to be sad and depressed but didn't explain why. The boy even had the guts to ask if he could just go home after being arrested. Like, bro, you just stabbed 21 people. This isn't detention. Authorities charged him with 21 counts of attempted murder, and since Pennsylvania doesn't play around, he was tried as an adult. Haribal was eventually sentenced to 23.5 to 60 years in prison, which means he won't be seeing another high school hallway until he's old enough to teach history.